Colleagues, dear speakers, ladies and gentlemen, dear all, welcome to this webinar run by Global Cities Hub, ICLEI, and with the participation of Geneva Environment Network and the Mission of Ecuador. Let me warmly welcome you to our traditional Global Cities Hub plastic debate with and about local and regional governments participating in the negotiation of the Plastic Pollution Treaty. As we are getting into the negotiation heat period, heading towards INC, Intergovernmental Committee of Negotiations, INC or INC4, which will be held end of April in Ottawa, Canada. We thought that we shall co-organize together with our dear participants this short informative session to get you all on the same line. So we will tackle current issues on the ongoing negotiation, so preparatory days and weeks before INC INC4. And also we will give more general information about this negotiation, about this UN Treaty on Plastic Pollution. And we will keep to procedural issues and possible activities that states and other stakeholders may undertake. The Global Cities Hub, which I represent as co-director, and my name is Kamelia Kemileva, is this neutral platform helping local and regional governments to understand and practice multilateral diplomacy whenever possible, meaning that states are obviously the masters of the multilateralism, but many issues have impact and represent vetted interest for local and regional governments. And in the very case of plastic pollution, the fight against plastic pollution, the regulations of production and distribution and transfer on plastic, the local and regional governments are obviously in the front line on various sense, and particularly for this treaty, we have said it already, we will repeat it, they will be absolutely instrumental in each and every state in the world on the implementation of the obligations which the treaty will imply for the states that ratify it. So the objective of today's webinar is to better inform you. I hope many local and regional governments are watching, but also other stakeholders, to inform you about dynamics of the negotiations, and the particular angle we are giving is obviously local and regional governments. So there is progress from the last webinar we held, as we held regularly this kind of webinars. And the main news is that there is a new zero draft out there, which is only 70 pages, meaning it's quite long for a zero draft. But this document, which you can consult on the official website of INC or on the website of the Global Cities Hub, if you want to see particular language for local and regional governments. So this draft encompasses the preoccupation, the interest, the concerns of all the negotiating states, and that's why it is as long. And we'll hear in a moment from Ecuador how they will be able to handle as main co-facilitator or chair of the negotiation this very long draft. A very short housekeeping rules is that we will do 2 or 3 rounds of questions depending on time. As of the second round and on the third round, we'll be happy to take questions from those who follow the webinar, from you. And also, let me introduce speakers. So we have Walter Schutt from the Mission of Ecuador in Geneva. And you all know that Ecuador is, as I said, in the leading co-facilitation role for the remaining part of the negotiation. You took this from Peru, who started the negotiation, and it was the chair until and including INC3, which was held in Nairobi November 2023. So hence, you've been invited to this webinar. Diana Rizzolio, also dear friend and the boss of the Geneva Environment Network, the leading coordinator. And as I said at the beginning, she is running a lot of informative and networking events from UNEP Geneva on INC and other issues. And Maga Schneider, who is dealing with running the file on circular economy and waste management, and is the focal point of this negotiation in one of the biggest and largest stakeholders on local and regional government side called ICLEI. So Magash will also be with us, unfortunately not physically, but online. All the others, included the two speakers, are with me in this room, and I'm very privileged to have them. So, dear participants, you can publish your questions on the on the chat, and my colleague, the co-director of the Global Cities Hub, Anto Duong, will be transferring the questions to me and to the speakers so we can reply. And we'll be very strict, 1 hour webinar. So stay with us, be active, ask questions, and we will very much try to reply to concrete questions as possible. Turning then to the speakers. So Walter Schutt, as I said, from the Permanent Mission of Ecuador to the United Nations in Geneva, but involved globally also in the negotiations, namely on this treaty. So what the negotiations implied so far for a member state, from the member states' view? You have the drafts, as we said, which is out there. So what are the dynamics right now around these drafts? And while speaking generally from a member state view, what can you say or what can you suggest already about this local and regional governments' involvement? Walter, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Camelia. I hope everyone can hear me well. First of all, thank you for the invitation to you, Global Cities Hub, Geneva Cities Hub, and to Jen and Diane here, and all the other organizers as well. From our perspective, and I will speak, like I said at the beginning, with a sort of a division, because we have a separate team for the presidency, which is led by Ambassador Luis Vallas, who's now the chair of the committee until the end of the process. That's how the arrangement or the agreement was made. But also, we participate as Ecuador in the national capacity with the delegation that will negotiate as any other member state that attends the INC sessions. But we do take that sort of combination of a facilitator role, because the chair has to provide that space for a dialogue as well. But of course, the delegation has to be actively involved with proposals in the negotiation. And as a country, we took all that recognition also as a symbol of the leadership that we were exercising even before the mandate that was adopted by Resolution 514. So we took it humbly as a recognition as well of that leadership, the actions that we were undertaking nationally, regionally, and here in Geneva with in 2021 a ministerial conference on marine litter and plastic pollution, which was the final political push for the adoption of Resolution 514, but also as an opportunity and a challenge as a country, as member state, you said. We think that is already a very, very complex negotiation from the very beginning. Even to adopt resolution was very, very difficult in Nairobi in last UNEA. We are about to enter into a new phase, a new session of the UNEA 6 in Nairobi very soon. But what we think helped was a very open conversation, even acknowledging the different interests and the capabilities and views from different states. There were at that time different drafts of the resolutions, one that really was not in favor of a legally binding instrument what other two versions really were in that favor, and was a merge finally what came out with the mandate. Even in that negotiation, other stakeholders took part of the discussions. In the process of our conference here in 2021, also we involved 900 participants from all others, different stakeholders. So now the key message is really to local governments and all other stakeholders to really get involved in the negotiation, not only to make awareness of the problem, because we know that already science have demonstrated, but really to make concrete proposals on what type of measures and needs, particularly needs, different needs are in their views, so that they can be translated into the project, measures, and means implementation to, in the future, implement those measures and regulations at all levels, including, of course, to facilitate them to present projects, to access the means that are needed for come back to achieve the main overall objective. That for the moment, but of course I can come back to any other further questions and perhaps elaborate a little bit more of the dynamics of the negotiations if you want me to do.
You're exactly on the second round. But so just to mention that, you know, we are not on the phase of like general constatation and, you know, general statements, but more what we said at the beginning and on the concrete need for concrete, as we call it, language, or concrete needs as concrete as possible, which other stakeholders may well wish to convey to member states. Because let's keep in mind that in the core negotiation, obviously stakeholders can express themselves, but in the core decision making on the final treaty draft, only member states, only national states can be the pen holders and decide what to be into the treaty. So this is one of the outcomes of this webinar, which we will clearly publish. So
one point on that, exactly. For instance, in the case of Ecuador, I can speak that at our national level, we have a situation of where for some private sector in our country is less expensive, it's cheaper to sometimes even import plastic waste than to go and do all the work of processing with get a partnership with the local governments, perhaps especially larger cities, to do all the processes of recollection, cleaning, classification of waste, and then use it as raw materials for other production processes. Until now, until before the regulations were adopted in the country, national act on single-use plastic banning and circular economy legislation as well, that was the easiest and the cheapest way. Now we are in the process of adopting a secondary regulation to even provide incentives to those private sectors, enterprises that need the raw material, to make sure and get those partnerships with the local governments to use that waste instead of importing as it was done in the past. And I think the same goes with the examples going back to multilateralism or multilateral negotiations on climate change. You have a number of progress that have been adopted and undertaken in the negotiation under UNFCCC that were in several cases promoted or even more advanced with local governments.
Exactly.
Let's talk about, for instance, market mechanisms that were so difficult or have been so difficult to make progress under the UNFCCC negotiations, while countries, member states don't have or are not ready to adopt certain measures or detailed design of those mechanisms. Some local governments of those same countries have already adopted and are already partnership with other and even presenting projects to apply to different funds. So that is also an example of how local governments can both contribute to the negotiation, but also contribute to action in reality that sometimes is even more advanced than the negotiation processes.
And you're very right also to introduce this private sector role, which in this treaty is particularly strong. I've seen also other negotiations at the UN, And this strikes me in the dynamic of this treaty that obviously private sector is very much present, and that the local governments have a role to play, also connecting with private businesses which are on their territory, with which they know them better, probably even than the national government, and they can also be into this. Recent example was from the city of Evian, which produces this mineral Evian water, which is very well known all over the world. And the city is in a public-private partnership with Evian Waters. And here we see also the possibility that they act together to the possible extent, because they are already not only in contact, but in a private-public partnership, which is settled there for many years. So they can act together to achieve probably some common objectives, which can be then conveyed to negotiating states. And probably I'm dreaming, but this is also a mechanism to be kept in mind. So thank you for pointing out on this. And I will come back to you for the more concrete dynamics after the overview, which Diana, who is probably one of the few persons on earth who know, together with Brenda, another dear colleague, Brenda Korkut from the Secretariat here in Geneva. So you know the process, the behind the curtains, steps to be taken, registrations and everything else. So what you can convey today to us, again, angle local and regional governments. I should say, unfortunately, local and regional governments cannot have direct statute to participate in this negotiation. So this is an obstacle probably, which means that they have to find other ways to participate. So could you enlighten us on all this, please?
Indeed, there are always creative ways to engage.
Creative ways.
So first, I would like, as my predecessor Walter, to start by thanking the Global Cities Hub for providing us the opportunity to discuss the INC process and how we can all contribute to this important goal, which is to end plastic pollution. And this is an issue particularly relevant for local authorities, as you have mentioned, Camelia. And we are using a lot of acronyms. So don't hesitate to write in the chat if you are still not familiar with some of the acronyms that we are using. You just provided I just wanted to react on the example that you provided, Camelia, about Evian, because indeed Evian is also sort of supported of some activities of some environmental actors that are based in Gland. So they are engaged.
These are small
environmental
cities.
Evian is on the other, for those who are not familiar with Geneva, Evian is on the other part of the lake, so not that far from Geneva, and supporting a sponsor of some global environmental bodies that are sitting here in Gland, to not name them. There's a Wetlands Convention and the IUCN, of course. I wanted first to come back to the United Nations Environment Assembly, that it's going to start very soon, in a few days. And I know that our friends here, both Walter, Camelia, and Magash will be very present there and very active. So it's important to remember that it's at this assembly that member states adopted a historical resolution, and when Walter refers to resolution 514, that's the resolution that has been very ambitiously adopted by member states 2 years ago. That gave mandate indeed to this INC's the Intergovernmental Negotiation Committee. So the resolution gave them mandate to develop this agreement to end plastic pollution and to host its secretariat at the United Nations Environment Program. So it's important also to mention that plastic was addressed in various resolutions ahead of the last assembly. And when the work was mature enough, and with the push of some member states, including this ministerial meeting that took place here in Geneva during COVID, then the member states were able to table this resolution, the famous 514 that was referred to, that which then was adopted. What is important to mention about UNEA, for those also who are not familiar with the United Nations Environment Assembly, is that it's the highest level decision-making body for matters related to the environment. So the right place to initiate this process. It's also important to mention, and Magash is next, for those who are not familiar, is that the United Nations Environment Programme itself works with the 9 major groups as defined by the United Nations. And one of these groups represents local authorities. There are indeed also major groups and stakeholders gatherings ahead of this United Nations Environment Assemblies to discuss inputs and advise on what is being negotiated. So that's a way to engage in these processes. And Magash is indeed one of the 2 facilitators for this specific group on local authorities. So the very right person to be involved in this webinar today. And through him, you can certainly learn on how to engage more, both in UNEA and in other UNEP-led processes, and how he's bringing the voice of local authorities as the Global Cities Hub is also trying to do. So at this session of the United Nations Environment Assembly, which is kicking up at the end of this month, the executive director of UNEP, so the United Nations Environment Programme, will report back on the progress in the implementation of this resolution. So it's one of the places where we'll have some updates. And what is important to mention here, maybe, I'm not sure it has been mentioned, is the interest that this negotiation is getting. So you have more and more stakeholders asking to be registered and to attend. Then, of course, there are the rules on who can have the observer status or not. So the last session that took place in Nairobi, that Camelia referred to, had almost 3,000 people registered. Then at the end, only 1,700 attended. But it's also expected that more and more people will be registering to attend these sessions. And the deadline for registration is indeed coming up soon, is on 26th of February. So just as UNEA starts, ends the registration deadline for attending the INC4, which will take place in Canada. So all participants are invited to register well in advance, because you have also visa processings for some member states. So it might take up to 12 weeks. So this is why they encourage earlier registration. So for those who are not familiar also in terms who can participate, of course, as Camelia mentioned, member states are the one leading the negotiation, but you have observers from UN and intergovernmental organizations, from non-governmental organizations who have either the ECOSOC status, for those who are familiar with the UN, or who are already registered with the other multilateral environmental agreements which secretariats are hosted by UNEP. And there are various ways of finding this information. Is also available online on the UNEP and UNEA portals. And there are creative ways of joining some of these organizations. I have heard today that for the upcoming UNEA, so it's not the INC, but it's UNEA, a well-known mayor is joining a delegation of ICLEI. But you could have local authorities be part of the national, so the member states, the country delegations that are registered when for member states that are interested in bringing the voice of these groups. So this is also a way of bringing these voices. I also want to mention here that there has been recently a push for some universities to be able to better be presented in some of these processes, to bring the science voice. And now there is a good hope that public universities will be able to get observer status and bring more science to these processes. And so I just wanted to bring some other specific elements concerning the upcoming session. So if you cannot join, there is always the possibility to follow online the negotiation, because all sessions are streamed on YouTube. So this is a way to try to better understand what's going on there. At INC4, there will be no space for those who are planning to attend or who are already part of delegations. So there won't be space for non-official side events, but there are always creative ways to have events in other places around the venues, as it has been the case also in Nairobi. for the last session. I also would like to mention what we as Geneva Environment Network have been doing. You know that platforms as the Geneva Environment Network have been used to foster the discussions in preparation of this negotiation. Also because at the last session, there was no concrete agreement on the intersectional work. So I'm going to close here, but Jen has served as platform to launch reports and discussions in support of the process through what we call the Geneva Beat Plastic Pollution Dialogues, which have kicked off back in 2020, so before the resolution was adopted. And so in these discussions, and we are releasing some reports, and I can mention that the role of local stakeholders have been highlighted in the thematics related to, for example, substitutes to plastics, referring to locally sourced substitutes to limit emissions, and also to adapt to the specificities of the regions and available resources. And this alternative to plastics is really one of the big topics that for which a few reports are being prepared. And then of course there's also the work of actors such as the Global Cities Hub and other local authorities advocates which are advocating for a better integration of local authorities in the agreement itself. So we look forward to what more we will learn today. So that's stopping here.
Thank you, Diana, and thank you very much. That was exhaustive. We realized it's very technical, and I was, watching at the people who are following us, whether they drop from the webinar because it's a huge technical jungle, and even me, it took me time to understand. So just to summarize, probably what is most important from what you said. You said many important things, but for local and regional governments, the participation, and do not underestimate the participation beforehand and afterhand of these INCs, because these international intergovernmental committees, these INC sessions, they are concentrated in 1 week. And even if you are present physically there in some creative way, as Diana said, you might not be able to reach out diplomats, you might not be able to reach out to Walter and others who will be extremely busy precisely to negotiate. So what we do here at the Global Cities Hub and ICLEI and others is really use the time before through social media, through webinars, or by any other way. So you can even contact us directly on our info email to send messages to negotiating member states, because we are all humans, and member states who are composed by diplomats, they have more time before than during the INC itself to process and to assess the information that you give. That for us, I mean, obviously it's good to be at the INC, but if you don't manage, or if you don't plan, or if you don't have a creative way to be part of your national government, or to be part of a network delegation or university, as you said, Diana, you can't make it, or you're not planning to make it. Use also the time before, because as Walter will tell us, the draft is out there and the negotiation is officially not ongoing, because we only have time to negotiate in this INC, but preparatory process for negotiation for language is very much already there. So this is probably also important to say that if you don't manage to get physically to the INC, doesn't mean that you cannot participate actively into the shaping of the treaty. Obviously, this is part of the time of Magash, to prepare this participation, substantive physical participation of local and regional governments, also of networks, which at the difference of local and regional governments can be directly accredited to the INC process through the different accreditation ways that United Nations uses, as Diana mentioned. So Magesh, you're working already now. You'll be also there and very much active in this famous INC4 week in Ottawa, Canada. So give us probably the heat of the day, what is going on, what ICLEI and other partners, including ourselves, yes, what you're cooking there for this INC4 process. Magesh.
Perfect. Thanks, Camelia, for having me today. Maybe just to mention, you highlighted ICLEI's scale, and this is true. We have a global footprint. I think it's important to acknowledge that a lot of our work and advocacy activities it's enabled by key partners and local and subnational governments, some front runners. So I think it's also important to acknowledge this, that we don't do it alone. It's a collective. See some familiar names in the participant list. So, for example, Rachel from the government of Quebec and Maria from government of Catalonia. I also see Emmeline from WWF. So this collective is extremely important. Before we maybe get into the coalition and what the plans are, I want to emphasize one point, and I think it's important to stress, particularly for member states that have the primary responsibility for developing the treaty. So we know cities and subnational governments around the world are not equal in terms of vested powers from national governments. In some parts of the world, a very decentralized approach is adopted, but on the other hand, we see a very centralized approach with minimal or no decision-making power vested to cities and subnational governments. The reason why I'm highlighting this is when we're advocating for a greater voice of cities and subnational governments, we mean to empower cities and subnationals within existing legal frameworks of the various regions and national governments. So we need to immediately highlight that we don't seek to usurp national powers or advocate for any, hostile takeover by the local governments, so to speak. And we need to mention this so that there's no misunderstanding. I think sometimes we talk the same language but misinterpret words. Our intention is to collaborate with national governments, bringing to the table insights and experience and expertise that exist at a local level to make implementation easier and faster. And this is a point that Walter was alluding to. We need to speed things up a little bit. We can't take it for granted that the people implementing and taking care of operationalizing the treaty will be the same people that are negotiating it. So we need to have very explicit mention of important considerations. And I think importantly, this was alluded to just now, we need to learn from previous MEA processes and the time it takes to get action on the ground. The recent publication by the Copernicus program, paints a rather grim picture. This was, I think, last week. So we really don't have time, and this treaty has massive mitigation potential that we need to start unlocking. Maybe I'm just going to jump a few points that I wanted to also raise. We can maybe do this in the second round. We've previously made numerous efforts and offers to national parties to assist with very specific local insights based on their focus and position. And this offer is still available. We're happy to advise and provide insights on a one-to-one basis. Local and subnational governments need to be seen as close partner to this process, and implementation will largely fail if we fail to include the local level in the treaty explicitly. So jumping to the coalition, I can provide some brief information, but we'll be formally launching this, I guess, in the coming weeks. So maybe I don't want to let out too many secrets at this point. But again, just to emphasize, this is only enabled through close working relationships with the key partners and subnational governments such as Quebec and Catalonia. And we have Global Cities Hub as an important partner as well. Maybe I can't mention all of the partners right now, but this will definitely be the case during the launch. The intention of the local and subnational coalition to end plastic pollution is essentially to ensure that cities and subnational governments are directly providing insights and expertise that can enhance the treaty, particularly implementation considerations. So this would ideally result in specific considerations being included into the instrument, and without going into the technical parts of where we've highlighted these inclusions could be. For local and subnational governments, so the second point is for local and subnational governments to be acknowledged as key partners, again, with regards to implementation primarily, but also the necessary enabling elements to be integrated, such as funding considerations, and to be involved in the shaping of delivery of the core obligations. So maybe I stop there and hand it back to you, Camelia.
So thank you very much, Magash. That's very important what you've mentioned. Again, you mentioned many important things, but at the beginning is that the local and regional governments should be seen as huge and shall I say indispensable partner to the central governments negotiating the treaty. That those negotiating the treaty, we cannot take it for granted that they are the same who will be implementing the treaties. They are not the same. I can say quite fairly, probably for all the countries, also because the implementation is much bigger than the delegation of the countries. And also to add another nuance, which I will not be asking Walter to comment if he doesn't want to, but in my discussions with state delegations, and I had many, there are like several approaches to this treaty, and some of the, let's say, most classical international law approach is that the treaty will have to concentrate on core obligations. Core obligations in international law are directed only to states, to central governments. And that's why the implementation part for some, extreme opinions should be dropped, because implementation is only national problem. For other opinions, implementation part will be really, smaller part of the treaty, basically setting this international secretariat monitoring body, which will be followed the implementation of the treaty. And then other opinions, and this I can kind of disclose without naming, but it's mainly countries coming from the Latin American region, where Ecuador comes from, and others say that the implementation of this treaty will be very complex, so it must contain implementation part or implementation provisions too. And actually, where we want to step in very firmly, as at least Global Cities Hub, we understand obviously that core obligations are addressed to member states, but this core obligation will actually bring many implementation needs, and some of these implementation needs must find their place in the treaty. And if we say so, then we say that local and regional governments must be very much part of this implementation part discussion and part of the treaty. So it's more nuanced than just negotiation. Obviously, it's about implementation and what will be basically finally in the final draft of the treaty, which will become then the binding rule. With this, Walter, and then you promised to disclose some info about the intersessional dynamics. I very much know that official intersessional work is not permitted, but exchanges, pre-negotiations, call it as you wish, what is going on from now on to April.
Thank you. Just before doing so, just another very small additional channel of opportunity for participation of local governments, besides also have mentioned in the previous round, is at least as an example in our country, is that when you establish national position towards the negotiation process or a COP to follow up a certain instrument in implementation or continue development of the complementary decisions, sometimes depending on the structure of each country, you have a council or a committee that establish such position, national position. In the case of Ecuador, for instance, just as an example for climate change, we do have an interinstitutional committee for climate change where we adopt and design a position for each COP. And in that national structure, we do have representation from local governments. So I'm sure that at this stage, early stage, countries don't have a national structure for plastic pollution negotiations yet, but they may have some consultation or council or structure where also local governments can participate in the design of national positions. So just to flag that as well as a complementary channel that could be very useful for them. And now on the dynamics is very complex because I would say roughly 70, 80 countries or even less than that were more active in the process at the beginning of the negotiations. Now we have more than 160 actively assisting at the INC meetings, perhaps among them, again, a number of half of them perhaps participating, but there are configurations of groups. Some of them with the regional perspective, GRULAC, African states, for instance, are the one that do have a regional position, a statement, and coordination. And well, others gather their positions with other elements or factors. Let's say European Union, they do have a common position, but there are other coalitions. I will mention one, for instance, the High Ambition Coalition, where we are also part of, which now unites around 60 countries, even with a very strong political commitment, having had 3, and now in Guinea we'll have a 4th ministerial meeting of the members of the coalition with very strong and ambitious positions. We also have a group of seats, small and developing states, Pacific seats. Now the Gulf Council of countries also making statements, and a group of like-minded countries as well. Some of them, they don't want to have at all any intersessional work, while others, including GRULAC, for instance, have been very much advocating for.
So GRULAC is the Latin American country.
Yes, the group of Latin America and the Caribbean. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
And advocating for intersessional work because the scale, the complexity is so huge that you cannot establish criteria for determining which are chemicals of concerns, polymers of concern, avoidable plastics, alternatives that Jen was also working on that, exception, the potential schemes for extended producer responsibilities. All of that, you cannot start negotiation only at that moment. You have to have some conversations, dialogue, not to change the text, but yes, to find commonalities, landing zones, and all of that. And it has been done, tested in other processes. Climate change, again, I always come back to my other arena of negotiations, where presidencies of the current presidents or upcoming presidencies of COPs convene virtual meetings of head of delegations,
right,
or lead negotiators. And the chair of INC, Ambassador Vallas, had already convened already and will continue to do so. He will also, and when this will finish, he will also engage and participate in regional preparatory meetings. We will have one in Panama for Latin America. There will be other regional meetings towards INC, where also there's another opportunity for those intersessional work, not officially, but with a very strong potential for finding those commonalities that are needed in such complex issues.
And this is very much needed, as you say. 2 quick questions. Thank you, Wouter. That was very helpful. Let me get to two quick questions which came from the chat. The one is, could you, even on the top of your head, talk about or say what are the parts of the treaty? I mean, I alluded to implementation part probably, but the more relevant for LRGs is, for example, in our point of view, the part on the waste management, financing, capacity building, and we have published on our website already, proposed language, which I fairly believe you will take as such and include directly in the draft treaty. I'm joking. I know this is not possible, but what are the areas where you will, see mention reference to local and regional governments? The other comes also from the chat, and I will read it out. What challenges do cities face in aligning their local policies with the goals of the Plastic Pollution Treaty? And how can these challenges be overcome? What will be the treaty's objective, quantified goals for the cities? Probably this is to be adapted to what you just said. So go ahead, reply whatever
Sure.
you have.
No, one area where there is already mentioned references, actually there are like, they have to not compete because there are references to local. If you just put Control F,
Yes.
there is also local community. So you'll see
Exactly.
like a number of them, but only a few of them are referring really to local governments. But there are references now indeed, and several of them refer to the process of the part of implementation. And that goes a lot with national implementation plans or national action plans, which is one of the tools on the table, very useful tools for the future implementation of the treaty. And here I think is where potential combination between global targets of reduction of plastic pollution by a certain year in the future, or by a certain percentage of plastic pollution reduction could be achieved through the sum of different national targets. Those targets nationally could be determined by each country if you follow the model of the bottom-up approach of the Paris Agreement, for instance, while at the same time nationally each country at the moment of establishing its own national action plan or implementation plan, they have to consult within all the sectors, and that certainly should involve or must involve local governments as well. Then you can do the math perhaps and see how much of that portion is for your city, but that will always depend on the internal decision. I think I really doubt that in the treaty there will be any room for specific targets for local governments specifically. It will be really for global level, and then perhaps indeed national levels, but that also will be nationally determined whether how voluntary or not voluntary that's part of the negotiations so far. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Very absolutely clear. And I join you. And just to mention that obviously a treaty is giving a minimum binding standards, but if you are more advanced in your city or in your region in fighting with plastic pollution or whatever, of course, the treaty will not stop you from progress. This is just is rather the opposite. That's the minimum standard. So there is no fear that the treaty will affect or reduce negatively a policy, I believe. Turning to concrete dynamics, Diana, and also from your point of view, I know that you very concretely, you will be continuing to organize also informational meetings, hybrid webinars for everyone interested, not only local and regional governments, but you will always be inviting us. Thank you for this. So what are the concrete steps next to be done? And just to ask the question, the big boss, the chair, Luis, will be probably or not in town. And are you planning to organize something in March?
We are indeed, but I just wanted to come back to this notion of coalitions.
Yes,
and the announcement that Maharaj did on the creation of this coalition. We have engaged, and Walter mentioned the High Ambition Coalition, which includes member states. There are other coalitions business coalition, science coalition, and we see that those are important for us for bringing up some elements and to really bring ambition in these groups. So we really welcome the creation of this coalition for local governments. And it's a good way also for various stakeholders to engage with that group. You go through the coalition to get what you need from that group. So very welcome. And I'm mentioning that because in a lot of the events that we are organizing in preparation of the negotiation, we always go contact those coalitions to engage with these groups. And we are launching a few reports that are being issued by various groups. And those have been announced on our website, so maybe we could also share the links in the chat. We have already had a few discussions this year, so as we mentioned, there's no intersectional worker agreed, but a lot of stakeholders bringing concrete elements that will help negotiators. And we will, as usual, the date is not finalized, so I cannot announce it yet, but we will have a briefing. Yes, I'm sorry for that, in preparation of the session. But that complements a lot of other events that are coming up. Indeed, the chair will be in Geneva, but we are still looking what is feasible or not, because he's also attending regional meetings in the regions. And so we are trying to see with his schedule what is possible or not possible to have. So I'm really sorry that I'm not able to share dates with you.
It's okay. This actually increases our interest to go to your website every day, hastily in the morning and checking up the
But
dates.
even if not in person, I think that we have seen with the previous chair, and we'll see certainly with the new chair, with Luis, that Ambassador Rayas, that he will be present and online and active when needed. So.
And we have his brilliant team. I don't know if Daniela, your colleague, is online, but just to say that she's physically part of the chair's office. Walter, you're representing Ecuador as state. So we have a strong Ecuador team, which we can push and I will not say harass, but push actively, you know, to give us information. Exactly. Thank you very much, Diana, for this. And yes, also I did a big advertisement, but their website is really very useful. So I can only advise this. The remaining time, Magash, I'm afraid is you have plenty of questions for you. So I will kind of summarize them. One small thing while I'm giving you the questions, don't move too much because I lose your voice when you move. So stay still and very still when you are replying because of microphone issues. So several questions, basically, part of them are running around how cities can probably repeat or summarize again, and I guess it's quite complicated to understand this, but how cities and local and regional governments can participate in the negotiation virtually, intersessionally, and as part of the physical presence in INC. So repeat or summarize or give probably more info on this. And also the development, so yes, related to the development process of the treaty. And then one concrete question is, what is the state of planning for live subnational events in Ottawa? So I guess what we call side events or events in parallel of the main negotiation, and specifically how local and regional governments can cooperate, again, mainly with DCLEI, I should say, because you'll be obviously in the driving seat of these coalitions and events. So if you can be as concrete, as exhaustive, and as exciting as possible, please go ahead.
Thanks, Camelia. So let's tackle this from the top, right? You mentioned first how cities can participate in INC negotiations. And it's something you alluded to earlier, is that during INC processes, it's quite limited for there to be, conversations with decision makers. And the best time to advocate for our messages and actively participate is actually prior to INC, the INCs, when people have time and can sit down with you and have a discussion. So INCs can get quite intense, where you start negotiations from the morning at 9 o'clock and can go well past midnight. So in terms of concrete participation, with that in mind, the coalition that I was alluding to earlier would be one of the primary vehicles that cities can utilize to feed their insights and experience into the INC process. We would then sit with a core team of reputable organizations and some frontrunner cities and subnational governments, synthesize this, and then spend the time to get this into the INC process. With this said, you also mentioned that, I think it was one of our colleagues mentioned that, to participate, then you need to be an accredited organization with UNEP and some other bodies. But even being accredited, for example, through ICLEI or through UCLG, for example, we're limited to have 5 names being put forward. So within this, there is still some prioritization that needs to happen. I do think it is a massive investment for cities to spend, for example, 23 April to 29th April in Ottawa. It is quite intensive. So I would suggest use the coalition, email us the insights, participate in the webinars and processes that seek and serve to collect this data. In terms then of the planning for live or side events and focusing on subnationals in Ottawa, I believe the side event information is not published yet. We have been considering pre-INC subnational government sessions. Just speaking frankly and openly, the dates do not seem to be conducive to any pre-INC large-scale subnational or local and subnational government event. We are looking into alternatives, though, where we could potentially have, smaller, closed-door, more succinct discussions, keeping in mind the practicalities of not being able to find, practical times and dates that work for all key players. In the run-up to INC4, though, we are planning to have a number of subsequent webinars. I guess your webinar, Camelia, is the first. So there will be some opportunities to at least participate, but in person might be a bit tricky. I see one more question, Camelia, about indication from national governments and advocating for local governments. If I can answer this very quickly as well.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, excellent. So I think this needs to be kept in context with what's been happening during the INC processes. For example, in INC2, there were lots and lots of discussions around, rules of procedure. And we're still currently in the space where there is a zero draft. It's not, proceeded to a first draft of sorts. And I think there are a number of member national governments that focus on and understand the importance of including local governments and the role that local governments could play. But actively advocating for it, I think it's maybe slightly too early in the process, where the core elements of the instrument is still not decided on. So I think we can see this maybe in the coming months, but currently not so strong. Thanks, Camelia.
Okay, and thank you, Magesh. Thank you very much. Yes, what we retain is really use the coalition, get informed about this. My colleague just published, our respective emails, and if you didn't see the chat, you can obviously find our respective emails on our website. One also element, I think it's never too early, and probably Wouter will support, because things might go in one of the scenario quite quickly. You know that there is INC 5, which is planned at the end of the year. So in this kind of, you know, settings, procedural rules, etc., there are sometimes a trick, but behind there is ongoing negotiation. So things can go either way, basically. I don't think somebody on earth know now, or if this person know, it's very, very smart. But things in one of the scenarios, things can go quite quickly, and the deal can be struck quite quickly. There is one scenario like this.
Sure.
So voila, I will give you the last word for a minute or so before we finish. And obviously encouraging everyone who has additional questions to write back to us, and we reply on email. So yeah, be invited to do so.
No, to join the enthusiasm for making use of this coalition of local governments. I think it will provide indeed so valuable input for presidency and for all the states that are participating in the negotiation. I think it's never too early, never too late, I would say, in this case, because of course we have a timeline and for 2 more sessions, but nobody knows. So
Exactly.
it will really be very, very extremely useful to have that input, as well as those that are coming from other coalitions of other relevant stakeholders, and also from all the informal settings, from the academia, from the different webinars. So just to encourage everyone to keep getting into the process and providing all their substance, their views, their needs into that because all of that will be taken into account from the president, I can assure you, and also for countries that are open and conscious, that Maguette said, of the importance of the local governments, not only for the design, but also most importantly, even for the implementation of that future instrument.
Right. Thank you so much for being with us. Maguette, your last word or something, or everything has been said and we will continue engagement?
The last famous words, as they say, just to thank you again for the platform, and I think collaborating and you know, getting as much insight as possible from cities and subnational governments is what we need. So keep the information flowing through us, and yeah, I look forward to seeing everybody at INC.
Thank you so much. And Diana?
To end plastic pollution, because at the end, that's what we want to do. We need everybody on board, and local authorities are definitely an important part of this process.
So thank you so much. Stay tuned. Thank you for this fantastic Geneva environment team of people around me. Anto, my colleague, Walter, Diana, and Maguette, and see you, some of you already next week at UNEA. So yeah, thank you very much and goodbye.